Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today we're talking about mechanics, and the footage in the background continues to be from Zark Playon. You can find a link in the description below if you want to check out their other stuff. And yeah, it's mechanics today. I've got two little bits of news though first. One's actually about Guild Wars, one's about the channel. The first Guild Wars bit of news that you're probably more interested in. If you are not aware, if you've been under a rock, there's another chance to play the game. It's not a full-fledged beta weekend, but there is a stress test that will be going on this coming Monday, May 14th. The time of the stress test is 11 in the morning until 6 at night, 11 a.m. till 6 p.m. That's -7 GMT, okay? So if you want to play, you can, but do bear in mind it's a stress test. They've got a very small window here because they're hoping for a lot of people to go on so that they can see how powerful their servers are, how their servers can handle all of the traffic. So if you have a really laggy experience, you kind of had it coming to you. This is what it's supposed to be about. I don't want to put you off though. I'd rather as many people as possible went into the stress test so we have less issues at launch. So that's what they're doing though. If you want to play, you'll get to play your same characters from the previous beta. Really cool that they've not been wiped at all. We don't know whether the next weekend they'll be wiping or not. They haven't announced that to us yet. But certainly for this stress test on Monday, May 14th, you can still play your old characters. So if there's one little thing you wanted to do, hey, maybe give it a shot, but it might be laggy. Also, the other bit of news is about my channel. The big ass long Guild Wars 1 Let's Play that pretty much this channel was built off of and has come from actually kind of finished today. Like, everything is kind of done in Guild Wars 1 now. There will still be Guild Wars 1 stuff going up on my channel, but that does mean that what was the Let's Play daily is now going to be some other slightly more Guild Wars 2 oriented content. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. I've got two potential series. I'm not sure which one I'll be starting tomorrow or the day after, but keep an eye out for that. And yeah, that's about it. Let's actually answer some questions, shall we? The first one was asked by Kinderweezy, who said, do ArenaNet need to work on boss AI? I noticed in the beta that all mobs would attack the nearest target, be it a pet, a player, or an NPC. This just makes me feel melee are going to have a hard time dealing constant damage because having to jump in and out of combat while ranged sit back able to avoid most of the NPC's attention. It would be nice to see bosses target whoever just unloaded everything on them, or who is constantly giving boons, or who keeps crippling them. What are your thoughts on this? Guild Wars 1 AI was really bad as well, actually. They seem to have chosen this. The primary thing that will decide whether an enemy chooses to attack something is proximity. The closer you are, really, that's the main factor. There are other things that come into it. For example, someone on really low health, the AI actually does have a preference for going after, but it's still mostly dictated by proximity. I feel like ArenaNet might have added this rule in thinking it would work quite well because in Guild Wars 2 you're moving so much, and I've defended this before as well, because as you're moving, the idea would really be that as you're low on damage you would then roll away perhaps. All classes have got a capacity to work at a ranged distance, so they could maybe roll back, and then say you're a warrior, you've been getting pretty badly hurt, you can dodge back, the aggro will go to someone else, and then you start peppering them with a rifle while your heal skill recharges, or you get yourself back up to a point where you can get back into the front where you will do more melee damage, and as a result put out more damage because melee does seem to be more risk reward and give you more damage in the first place. So that's, I guess, the idea that they had for it, where everything's so much moving is going on. Having just proximity doesn't matter so much because enemies will be swapping targets fairly often anyway, considering people are always moving in and out regardless. However, I don't think that's everything they need. After my experience actually playing in the beta, some classes have a lot more difficult time getting in and out than other classes. Certain classes do have a lot more mobility, and certainly different classes need to excel in different areas, but I do think that particularly with the warrior, which I had quite a lot of experience with, it was very much a one-way ticket. It was, I would use my rifle and then jump in, and once I was in, that was kind of it until I managed to roll away. If you don't have that backup with you to take the aggro, it can cause some problems. I think in comparison to other MMOs as well, that proximity based is more than enough considering there is no taunting. Like in other MMOs you could have the most complex enemy AI out there, but it would just be trivialized anyway because they give somebody a taunt, or there'd be a way to use a taunt that would just completely ignore all of that and they just target you. Guild Wars 1 worked kind of on the same principles, and yes, you could manipulate the enemies there because that was once again proximity based, but it was a little bit better in general content. It did allow for farming and certain methods of tanking, but for the most part it was pretty good, and I'm hoping to see that with Guild Wars 2 a bit more. I think one thing that's exacerbating this issue is the fact that even though all classes are supposed to be able to function at all ranges, you can certainly see that those melee classes, for example, we shouldn't really call them because like the thief can operate with a bow and the warrior can operate with a rifle, so there's no such thing really as a ranged class or a melee class anymore. But when you're playing a thief with 2 daggers, your range is still far shorter than, say, an elementalist with 2 daggers, because they're still casting spells and they do still have a fair bit of range going on there. So there is still a difference, I feel like, and that might mean that just this simple proximity based thing could be causing problems. I'd like to see the AI be improved in certain areas, specifically, as you say here, with bosses. Certain bosses I'd like to see do specific things, especially when we're talking about event bosses, just normal event bosses like the Drake Broodmother, for example, which are just typical enemies but scaled up to a large size. I'd like to see some better AI coming out of them so that they know a little bit more wisely who to attack and what specifically to do in certain situations. I don't mind if most of the enemies in the game are just mindless creatures that don't really have too much AI attached to them, but if we're supposed to be in a significant fight, certainly improve the AI. And why I say just these kind of bosses and not massive bosses like the Shatterer or Sequotl the Sunless is because Guild Wars 2 doesn't seem to have those big event bosses move at all. Have you noticed that? They just stand in the same spot, which was something a lot of us were disappointed about. I still haven't seen really a big unique boss like that isn't rooted to the ground in some location and just uses attacks from around there. I suppose there are certain problems that come with that. We have seen that in Guild Wars 2 things don't have a turning around animation. They still don't have that. So the bigger the creature gets, the more prominent that is and the easier it is to see that when a creature turns around, it just suddenly flicks, the whole model will just jump to the other direction. And the bigger and bigger things get, you can look at some Oak Hearts and like that Veteran Oak Heart event that's out in Queensdale. That thing just looks ridiculous when it turns around, and I suppose with these bigger bosses they would have the same problem. It is certainly far harder to create a boss that isn't rooted to one spot, but I think that the boss fights would be far more exciting and interesting if they did that. And in particular, I'm hoping that Zhaitan, who we all know we're going to be fighting by the end of the game, of course that's how things are going to end, I would be far more excited if I knew Zhaitan had the capacity to fly around in the air and actually move and do some real stuff, rather than while we're fighting him just sit in the same location. We've seen obviously that the bosses can move as they start the event and leave the event, like the Shatterer will fly off and then explode in the sky, Sequotl will come out of the water when he arrives, but for the actual purposes of the fight, I'd like to see some movement going on. How cool would it be to actually see the Shatterer at some point get up in the air and start flying around and raining fire down on you? You've got to use some of the catapults or Asuran inventions around there to shoot it out of the sky. That would be amazing, but we're not seeing that with the boss fights at the moment, which is a little underwhelming. Maybe slightly off the topic of actual enemy AI, but certainly with bosses, I think that's a place that they could be improving. And those other middle ground bosses, like the champions and the veterans, certainly I'd like to see some better AI as well. I guess when ArenaNet have got a really good grasp and balance and idea of what all of their professions are doing and what all of the weapon skills ranges and things like that are, that's when they can refine the AI slightly more. The second question is from Mr. Lazela1, who said, a lot of people are discussing and debating the possibility of chat bubbles in Guild Wars 2. Reason being, so people would notice what you're saying instead of getting ignored, as many things in the chat box do tend to get ignored. For example, when you're fighting a boss and you need to kill the spores which are healing it, but nobody's attacking it. Furthermore, as things currently stand, you would say it in local, and everyone hears it. Personally, I believe it's a silly idea and will ruin the whole aesthetic of Guild Wars 2 and create cartoon comic look which is horrible, and was having a long and gruesome debate on the Guild Wars 2 Facebook wall about it. I believe that the chat system in the beta was definitely very raw and needs some work. For example, a simple /shout or other mechanic that would allow you to talk to the people that are in your vicinity without the need for these silly chat bubbles. Also, chat bubbles would just push what you need to say in people's faces, which doesn't seem all that desirable to me. I believe it wouldn't be too bad if you have the option to disable them, but this contradicts the point of people ignoring you. My question is this: do you believe that such mechanics will be implemented, or are even a good idea, as I really don't? Well, this idea of chat bubbles for actual players isn't too far-fetched for the game. One thing you have to consider is the NPCs and all those conversations that are going on. Guess what? They had chat bubbles. In fact, I believe they had chat bubbles in earlier versions. This current beta, did they have chat bubbles? I'm pretty sure they still did. But that was something that was a part of the game, and it didn't look too odd out. I mean, Guild Wars 2 isn't trying to go for this hyper-realistic feel, so the idea of having chat bubbles there for players, I don't actually think it at all is going against their aesthetic. It might not gel in 100% if you were to do very cartoony-looking chat bubbles, but they don't necessarily have to stick with that. They could always go with that very painterly feel that they've got over everything else on the UI saying in the game, and I honestly do feel like chat bubbles would fit quite well. There are different ways of doing chat bubbles though. Some games you can look at, like RuneScape, where you get the option to make the text swirl around in all these crazy colours and flash, and that can be kind of annoying. I can see that, especially in very crowded areas where people are trying to sell things. Not necessarily that would be a problem in Guild Wars 2, considering so much is done through the trading post, but still, it's something to consider. They could just add chat bubbles without any of that extra flashy stuff that could potentially irritate people and get away with it just fine. I would be perfectly happy with that. Guild Wars 1 had chat bubbles in there as well, and I've never really met anybody that complained about that. Personally, I never really used or looked at the chat bubbles that much, not until I realised there was a lot of NPCs that had information to tell you in those chat bubbles that you'd otherwise miss. Most of the time, and my experience in the beta as well, was that the chat box was sufficient, so I'm certainly not someone in a camp that would be begging for chat bubbles, but I don't think that there'd be anything wrong with them in the game. Right now, the chat system did seem to have a lot of cool features with channels, creating your own channels and choosing specifically exactly what kinds of feeds go into those, who can be in the channel, what kind of combat text comes up in the channel, what other things will be told to you in there. It was actually quite cool and quite a good experience. Chat bubbles feels to me like something very small that ArenaNet could add in the end, and you mentioned here about the possibility of people being able to disable them. Well, I think that really should be a stance they go with for a lot of different features in the game. If there's something that could potentially upset someone, then sure, allow it to be disabled. Why not? You know, if you are somebody disabling that, then you're going to have to focus slightly more on the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner, and it should be as simple as that. Guild Wars 2 is trying to make things really sociable for people and try to encourage that kind of social interaction, so to me, it does feel like chat bubbles, considering it's in so many other games, and it can draw your eye in some occasions. I don't think in a negative way. I think that it would be beneficial to be in the game, though the chat box itself I've always kind of felt was sufficient, and I almost feel like it's not really that worth debating about. But I did see there was a huge conversation on Reddit about it, absolutely massive. That's generally my stance on it. I'm not sure how many extra things they could add with it that would really wow people with a chat bubble system. Some people seem to get the impression ArenaNet need to innovate with every little thing. That's something I think it works. Why not just add it in? Even if they were just very plain boxes like the Guild Wars 1 version of the system was, I probably wouldn't mind that much. They're speech bubbles after all, and like I said, we saw a lot of NPCs saying them in the game at previous points, and it never occurred to me that it was somehow breaking the style of the game with those there. It just made it sometimes easier to see what characters or people were saying if you couldn't quite get close enough to hear them in the game world. Proximity for chat, which you talk about a little bit here with the /shout, is a kind of a cool topic because this was one of those weird little things. I was so used to Guild Wars 1, which was a fully instanced game, and it just worked on the principle that if you were in the same outpost as someone or town as someone, or you were out in the same instance as them in the same explorable area, you would always be able to read what they say in chat. There was never any proximity-based things that ever came into it. Obviously, now Guild Wars 2 is a persistent world, and this certainly comes forward. I think I saw the game doing some interesting things. I couldn't 100% figure out exactly the way it was working out, but I believe if you speak in all chat, it's a pretty large chunk of the map that you're on of people that will hear it. However, if it's someone in a party with you, they'll probably hear it no matter where you are, which is obviously very, very helpful and encourages people to be in parties, which is something we're looking for. So yeah, it's one of those social features. I wouldn't be surprised if ArenaNet add it in. I wouldn't be surprised to hear it's on their plans. I certainly don't have anything against them, as long as, I mean, there is a point where they can be too obtrusive, as you seem to be worried here, but I wouldn't be concerned that ArenaNet are going to take that route. They certainly haven't slipped up in any way like that before, so I have no reason to believe they would here. But hey, we'll see. It might be something that pops up in a future beta, and you'll hear me complaining about it here on Guild Wars 2 Daily. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's mechanics for today. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks again for the footage in the background. You guys can find a link in the description below. And if you've got any questions for me, please let me hear it. It doesn't matter where you send them, by the way. A lot of people ask me this. I'll probably see it if it's on Twitter, if it's in the comment section, if it's a personal message, or even on my channel. I'll probably find it and possibly pick it. So, yeah, thanks very much, guys. And I guess I'll see you tomorrow.